Variations. Spectrum of social systems. Dominance hierarchies emerge as a result of intersexual and intersexual selection within groups, where competition between individuals results in differential access to resources and mating opportunities. This can be mapped across a spectrum of social organization ranging from egalitarian to despotic, varying across multiple dimensions of cooperation and competition in between. 78. Conflict can be resolved in multiple ways, including aggression, tolerance, and avoidance. These are produced by social decision-making, described in the relational model, created by the zoologist Frans de Waal. 79. In systems where competition between and within the sexes is low, social behavior gravitates towards tolerance and egalitarianism, such as that found in woolly spider monkeys. 80. 81. In despotic systems where competition is high, one or two members are dominant while all other members of the living group are equally submissive, as seen in Japanese and rhesus macaques, leopard geckos, dwarf hamsters, gorillas, the cichlid Neolamprologus poulter, and African wild dog. 82. 83. Linear ranking systems, or pecking orders, which tend to fall in between egalitarianism and despotism, follow a structure where every member of the group is recognized as either dominant or submissive relative to every other member. This results in a linear distribution of rank, as seen in spotted hyenas and brown hyenas. 84. Context dependency. Earing or cattle competing for dominance. Dominance and its organization can be highly variable depending on the context or individuals involved. In European badgers, dominance relationships may vary with time as individuals age, gain or lose social status, or change their reproductive condition. 85. Dominance may also vary across space in territorial animals as territory owners are often dominant over all others in their own territory but submissive elsewhere, or dependent on the resource. Even with these factors held constant, perfect dominance hierarchies are rarely found in groups of any great size, at least in the wild. 11. Dominance hierarchies in small herds of domestic horses are generally linear hierarchies whereas in large herds the relationships are triangular. 86. Dominance hierarchies can be formed at a very early age. Domestic piglets are highly precocious and, within minutes of being born, or sometimes seconds, will attempt to suckle. The piglets are born with sharp teeth and fight to develop a teat order as the anterior teats produce a greater quantity of milk. Once established, this teat order remains stable with each piglet tending to feed from a particular teat or group of teats. 87. Dominance-subordination relationships can vary markedly between breeds of the same species. Studies on Merinos and Border Leicesters sheep revealed an almost linear hierarchy in the Merinos but a less rigid structure in the Border Leicesters when a competitive feeding situation was created. 9. Species with egalitarian, nonlinear hierarchies. Although many group-living animal species have a hierarchy of some form, some species have more fluid and flexible social groupings, where rank does not need to be rigidly enforced, and low-ranking group members may enjoy a wider degree of social flexibility. Some animal societies are democratic, with low-ranking group members being able to influence which group member is leader and which one is not. Sometimes dominant animals must maintain alliances with subordinates and grant them favors to receive their support in order to retain their dominant rank. In chimpanzees, the alpha male may need to tolerate lower-ranking group members hovering near fertile females, 88, or taking portions of his meals. 89. Other examples can include mariki monkeys. Within their groups, there is abundant food and females will mate promiscuously. Because of this, males gain very little in fighting over females, who are, in turn, too large and strong for males to monopolize their control, so males do not appear to form especially prominent ranks between them, with several males mating with the same female in view of each other. 90. This type of mating style is also present in manatees, removing their need to engage in serious fighting. 91. Among female elephants, leadership roles are not acquired by sheer brute force, but instead through seniority, and other females can collectively show preferences for where the herd can travel. 92. In Hamadryas baboons, several high-ranking males will share a similar rank, with no single male being an absolute leader. 93. Female bats also have a somewhat fluid social structure, in which rank is not strongly enforced. 94. Bonobos are matriarchal, yet their social groups are also generally quite flexible, and serious aggression is quite rare between them. 95. In olive baboons, certain animals are dominant in certain contexts, but not in others. Prime age male olive baboons claim feeding priority, yet baboons of any age or sex can initiate and govern the group's collective movements. Reproductive suppression. Reproductive suppression is the prevention or inhibition of reproduction in otherwise healthy adult individuals. It occurs in birds, mammals, and social insects. It is sometimes accompanied by cooperative breeding. It is maintained by behavioral mechanisms such as aggression, and physiological mechanisms such as pheromone signaling. In evolutionary terms, it may be explained by the theory of inclusive fitness. Reproduction of subordinate marmosets is suppressed by the withholding of infant care. 1. Overview. Acorn woodpeckers are among the birds that breed cooperatively and make use of reproductive suppression. Reproductive suppression is the prevention or inhibition of reproduction in otherwise healthy adult individuals. 2. It includes delayed sexual maturation, puberty, or inhibition of sexual receptivity, facultatively increased interbirth interval through delayed or inhibited ovulation or spontaneous or induced abortion, abandonment of immature and dependent offspring, mate guarding, selective destruction and worker policing of eggs in some eusocial insects or cooperatively breeding birds, and infanticide of the offspring of subordinate females either by directly killing by dominant females or males in mammals or indirectly through the withholding of assistance with infant care in marmosets. And some carnivores. 3. 1. The reproductive suppression model holds that females can optimize their lifetime reproductive success by suppressing reproduction when future, physical or social conditions for the survival of offspring are likely to be greatly improved over present ones. 2. When intragroup competition is high, it may be beneficial to suppress the reproduction of others, and for subordinate females to suppress their own reproduction until a later time when social competition is reduced. This leads to reproductive skew within a social group, with some individuals having more offspring than others. The cost of reproductive suppression to the individual is lowest at the earliest stages of a reproductive event, and reproductive suppression is often easiest to induce at the pre-ovulatory or earliest stages of pregnancy in mammals, and greatest after a birth. Therefore, neuroendocrine cues for assessing reproductive success should evolve to be reliable at early stages in the ovulatory cycle. 4. Reproductive suppression occurs in its most extreme form in eusocial insects such as termites, paper wasps and honeybees, and in a mammal, the naked mole rat, which depend on a complex division of labor within the group for survival and in which specific genes, epigenetics and other factors determine whether individuals will permanently be unable to breed or able to reach reproductive maturity under particular social conditions. 4, 5, 6. It is found, too, among cooperatively breeding fish, 7 cooperatively breeding birds such as some woodpeckers, 8 in mammals in which a breeding pair depends on helpers whose reproduction is suppressed. 9, 10, 11, 12. In eusocial and cooperatively breeding animals, most non-reproducing helpers engage in kin selection, enhancing their own inclusive fitness by ensuring the survival of offspring they are closely related to. 13. Wolf packs suppress subordinate breeding. Pre-fertilization. Environmental cues. Food shortage. Female mammals experience delays in the onset of puberty or increase their interbirth intervals in response to environmental conditions that are associated with low abundance and poor quality of foods. Nutritional stress is apparently linked to the female endocrine system and ovulatory pheromonal cycle. For example, orangutans Pongo pygmaeus experience high ketone due to fat burning and low estrogen levels during times of low food availability and poor food quality, but low ketone and high estrogen levels that stimulates onset of the ovulation during the fruit masting seasons that occurs about every 4 years on Sumatra. 14. Since adult female orangutans are solitary, interference by other females can be ruled out as influencing their temporary reproductive suppression and facultatively long interbirth intervals. Pelagian Andrus yellow baboons Papiocynocephalus in Kenya were far less likely to ovulate or conceive during periods of drought or extreme heat, especially if they live in large groups, resulting in longer interbirth intervals during periods of nutritional and thermal stress. 15, 16. Population density. Striped mice have reproductive suppression when in communally breeding groups but not when in monogamous social groups. 12. High population density can lead to reproductive suppression. For example, when high numbers of yellow baboon Papiocynocephalus females are simultaneously in estrus at Mikumi National Park, Tanzania, dominant females form coalitions that attack subordinate females, disrupting their reproductive cycle and preventing conception. 2. This places constraints on the number of offspring born in a single generation. Since infant mortality in these baboons depends in part on the number and ages of other infants born into the group, pre-ovulatory females that are most susceptible to stress-induced delay or inhibition of ovulation are the most frequent targets of female coalition attacks. Female attackers are often in advanced stages of pregnancy and have the most to lose if the number of infants in the group reaches an unsustainable level. A similar study of Chacma baboons Papio ursinus noted high levels of female-female aggression around the mating season when the number of ovulating females was high, indicated by sexual swellings, and that aggression directed toward suppressing the mating opportunities of ovulating females. 17. Among elephant seals Mirunga, high neonatal mortality occurs when the number of pups born in a season is high, with deaths resulting from injury and starvation. 2. To counteract loss of their pups, elephant seals conceive next year's offspring immediately after giving birth to this year's young, but delay implantation for 4 months. Female striped mice Rhabdomys pumilio in monogamous social groups do not experience reproductive suppression, but those living in communally breeding groups with high population density and large numbers of old breeding females do. 12. Social cues. Aggression. Chronic physiological stress resulting from aggression by dominant toward subordinate individuals is thought to be a major cause of delayed maturation and suppressed ovulation in subordinate individuals of a wide range of species. 11, 18, 19, 20. In response to stress, the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenocortical axis, is activated, producing high concentrations of circulating adrenal glucocorticoids which, when chronically present, negatively influence an animal's health and can lead to reproductive suppression in male marmots Marmota marmota, and blocks of ovulatory cycles of female talapoin monkeys Myopothecus talapoin, meerkats Suricata suricata, and marmots. 11, 18, 19, 20. Meerkats Suricata suricata breed cooperatively, and the dominant female aggressively suppresses breeding in subordinate females. 11. In cooperatively breeding meerkats Suricata suricata, the dominant breeding female is the oldest and heaviest female who is highly aggressive towards subordinate females during the breeding season and temporarily evicts subordinate females from the group. 11. Evicted subordinates suffer repeated attacks during the later stages of the breeding female's pregnancy and showed glucocorticoid levels twice normal. 11. Evicted subordinates suffer repeated attacks during the later stages of the breeding female's pregnancy and showed glucocorticoid levels twice normal. Approximately 3 days after giving birth, subordinate females return to the group to help rear the breeding female's pups, at which time the dominant female is no longer aggressive toward them. By inducing the stress response in subordinates, the breeding female disrupts the ovulatory cycle and prevents mating of the subordinate females, or causes the pregnancies of subordinates to fail if they do occur. If her social group is small, the breeding female evicts all subordinate females, but if it is large, she targets older females, pregnant females and nonkin. 11. However, reproductive suppression through stress does not apply to many species including orangutans for which subordinate males have lower GC levels than dominant ones, 21. Marmosets for which non-breeding subordinate females were not found to have higher GC levels than dominant breeding females, 22. Social carnivores and other animals. 23-24. However, the correlation between glucocorticoid levels and position in the social hierarchy is dubious. 25. Dominant breeding males and females often have higher glucocorticoid levels among the dwarf mongoose, Helligale parvula, African wild dogs, Lysound pictus, and gray wolves, Canis lupus, in which older and heavier individuals make up the breeding individuals in the group with younger individuals helping to raise their pups. 23. Pheromones. African wild dogs, Lysound pictus, live in packs with a dominant breeding pair. 9. Pheromonal suppression of subordinate male and female reproduction is the mechanism by which dominant breeding pairs suppress the reproduction of non-breeders in communally and cooperatively breeding species, especially in the absence of stress. 9. Wolves, Canis lupus, coyotes, Canis latrans, and African wild dogs, Lysound pictus, live in packs with a dominant breeding pair that does most of the territorial urine scent marking in the group. During the breeding season, the dominant male urinates over the dominant female's urine, possibly to hide the female's reproductive status from other males. Pheromones in urine are implicated as a possible mechanism to shut down the subordinate's reproductive cycle. Only the dominant pair mate and have young, producing 1 litter per year. Subordinate females either do not exhibit estrus hormonal changes or they occur irregularly. Occasionally a subordinate animal leaves the pack and forms a new mating pair when it then exhibits of the territorial urine marking and mating behavior that was suppressed when living in the presence of the dominant breeding pair. 9. Yellow, banded and dwarf mongooses live in families similar to wolf packs with scent marking done almost exclusively by the dominant pair. Dwarf mongooses show synchronous estrus but only the dominant female regularly gives birth. Subordinate females do not conceive or abort early, but do lactate after the dominant female gives birth and participate in communal nursing. When the subordinate females leave the parental pack they will become fully reproductively active in new groups they help establish. In captivity, more than one dwarf mongoose in a group can give birth but the young of subordinates do not survive. However, if the size of their cage is increased and density is lower, reproductive activity of subordinates resumes. As in wolves, pheromonal control over the reproductive cycle of the mongoose is implicated as a mechanism for reproductive suppression. 9. Female house mice need contact with male pheromones to initiate puberty. 26. The house mouse Mus musculus is territorial with a single dominant male marking its territorial boundary with urine while subordinate males do not urine mark. 26. A female's rate of urine marking is elevated in response to a dominant male's urine marking, and his urine contains pheromones that accelerate her ovulation. The presence of a dominant adult male in his urine are crucial for young females to initiate puberty. Females isolated from males often do not experience puberty or have unstable ovulatory cycles. Contact with the urine of a dominant female signals a young prepubescent female to delay the onset of puberty. When housed with only an adult male, female mice reach puberty within 25 days, but puberty will not occur until 40 to 50 days if they are housed with adult females. Being grouped with other females suppresses the young female's serum luteinizing hormone and prolactin. Exposure to the male elevates their luteinizing hormone levels followed by increased serum estradiol. Female mice have a short ovulatory cycle when housed with males and a long cycle when housed with only other females. 26. Queen pheromones are among the most important chemical messages regulating insect societies but are yet to be isolated. 27. In natural colonies of the Saxon wasp, Dolichospila saxonica, queens emit reliable chemical cues of their true fertility, but as the queen's signals decrease incidences of worker reproduction increases. 28. In colonies of Bombus terrestris, the queen can control oogenesis and worker egg laying by regulating concentrations of juvenile hormone JH in workers. This is likely achieved through queen pheromones. 29. Social self-inhibition. Game theory suggests that subordinates suppress their own reproduction to avoid the social cost imposed on them if they reproduce, including expulsion from the group and infanticide against their progeny by dominant breeding individuals. 24. Forced dispersal from the group may be extremely dangerous, involving high levels of predation and difficulty finding food and sleeping sites. In the absence of stress or pheromones as a mechanism, a self-inhibition model was proposed that suggests subordinates can choose to inhibit their own reproduction in cooperatively breeding groups in order to remain flexible and share in the group's productivity. When group members are closely related, independent breeding opportunities are poor, and detection of mating and pregnancy is high, subordinates choose to suppress their own reproduction. 24. The self-inhibition model has been applied to female common marmosets, Calothrix jacus. When they are introduced into a new group, female marmosets are immediately subordinate, experience a drop in chorionic gonadotrophin, CG, and within the first 4 days and stops ovulating. 130. Subordinate female ovaries are smaller than dominants and secrete little estrogen. 30. Older female marmosets are less subject to ovulatory self-restraint and the scent of an unfamiliar dominant female does not affect their ovulation. However, continued exposure to the dominant female may represent a social, rather than biological, cue that causes the subordinates to shut down their ovulation. 30. Mate guarding. Alpha male mandrills guard the oldest and most fertile females to prevent other males from mating with them. 31. Limiting access to reproductive partners through mate guarding is a form of reproductive suppression. In the banded mongoose, Mungos mungo, the oldest males have the most offspring. Yet mating in this species is highly promiscuous. 32. The older males increase their reproductive success by mate guarding the oldest most fertile females since they cannot guard all the females in the group. 32. Therefore, successfully breeding older males are highly selective in their mate guarding and exert mate selection. Mate guarding is also a mechanism of reproductive suppression of subordinates in mandrills, Mandrillus sphinx, in which males over the age of 8 mate guard, with alpha males performing 94% of the mate guarding and being responsible for siring 69% of the offspring. 31. Eusociality. Model of naked mole rat burrow with soldiers, workers, and a single reproductive female or queen, a social structure similar to the castes of the eusocial insects. Ovary activation in honeybee workers is inhibited by queen pheromones. 5. In the Cape honeybee, social parasites that are of the worker caste enter the colony and kill the resident queen, activate their own ovaries and parthenogenetically produce diploid female offspring, Pleidoki, behaviors linked to a single locus on chromosome 13. The parasites produced queen-like pheromones falsely signaling the presence of a queen, suppressing the reproduction of workers native to the colony and policing or destroying these eggs. 5. Alternative slicing of a gene homologous to the Gemini transcription factor of Drosophila controls worker sterility. Knocking out an X and results in rapid worker ovary activation. A 9 nucleotide deletion from the normal altruistic worker genome may turn a honeybee into a parasite. 5. As for many eusocial insects, termite workers are totipotent and rarely produce offspring, although they are capable of reproduction when the breeding pair dies. Researchers hypothesize that the gene NeoFem2, which is involved in cockroach communication, plays a critical role in queen worker communication. They experimentally took the king or queen out of the colony. Some workers displayed pre-mating head-butting behavior and can go on to become reproductive while others did not. However, when the NeoFem2 gene was suppressed, budding behavior did not occur, indicating that the gene is essential in allowing the queen to suppress worker reproduction. 4. NeoFem the second of may play a role in cockroach egg pheromones. 4. Naked mole rats resemble eusocial insects in becoming reversible non-breeders at birth. Underground-dwelling mole rats having an elaborate division of labor, high densities as colonies mature, high levels of inbreeding and extreme permanent reproductive despotism. Helping to rear the dominant female's young may be the only way they can ensure an individual's survival. 2. 633. Post-fertilization. Destruction of eggs. Destroying eggs such that only one female's eggs survive is documented in cooperatively breeding birds such as acorn woodpeckers, Melanerps formicivorus. About 25% of acorn woodpecker groups contain 2 or more joint nesting females that cooperate to raise young, but cooperative female destroy each other's eggs prior to laying their own. These eggs are eaten by other members of the group, including the mother. 8. In Cape honeybees, Apis mellifera capensis, the multiple mating of the queen and existence of half-siblings creates subfamilies within the colony. Sometimes the queen fails to control worker reproduction. In response, workers remove eggs laid by other workers, leading to less than 1% of offspring being worker laid. 5. Worker policing of worker eggs occurs in the European hornet, Vespa crabo, honeybees and wasps. 34-35. Spontaneous abortion. Social stress and resource limitation can lead to high rates of spontaneous abortion as a mechanism of reproductive suppression. Meerkats, subordinate females that have conceived prior to being evicted from the group by the breeding female during the breeding season, fail to carry their pregnancies as a result of increased stress, higher GC levels, and reduced access to food and other resources. 10-11. Evicted females regularly copulate with males from neighboring groups. Subordinate females have low conception rates and increased abortion rates in response to low food availability and high predation risk. 11. Dwarf mongooses show synchronous estrus, but only the dominant female regularly bears young. If subordinate females do manage to conceive, they abort the pregnancy. 9. Infanticide. Infanticide is a mechanism of reproductive success in many species. Alpha female dwarf mongooses and African wild dogs kill offspring other than their own, but alpha males do not. 23. This may be because the breeding alpha may have sired a rare subordinate's offspring. Subordinate females time their pregnancies such that they give birth several days after the alpha female, to reduce the risk of infanticide. Pregnant subordinate meerkats kill the pups of the dominant breeding female. 11. No dominant female pups have ever been observed killed after their 4th day of life. Evicted subordinate females are kept out for 3 days after the breeding female gave birth. 8. Infanticides involving the killing of a subordinate female's offspring by the breeding female have been observed in wild common marmosets, as well as 2 instances of infanticide in which a subordinate female bred and then killed the breeding female's babies. Infanticidal marmoset females are often in the last trimester of pregnancy, but postpartum females do not commit infanticide. 1. Kin selection. Kin selection is a process whereby natural selection favors a trait due to its positive effects on the reproductive success of an organism's relatives, even when at a cost to the organism's own survival and reproduction. 1. Kin selection can lead to the evolution of altruistic behavior. It is related to inclusive fitness, which combines the number of offspring produced with the number an individual can ensure the production of by supporting others, weighted by the relatedness between individuals. A broader definition of kin selection includes selection acting on interactions between individuals who share a gene of interest even if the gene is not shared due to common ancestry. 1. The cooperative behavior of social insects like the honeybee can be explained by kin selection. Charles Darwin discussed the concept of kin selection in his 1859 book, On the Origin of Species, where he reflected on the puzzle of sterile social insects, such as honeybees, which leave reproduction to their mothers, arguing that a selection benefit to related organisms, the same stock, would allow the evolution of a trait that confers the benefit but destroys an individual at the same time. J.B.S. Haldane in 1955 briefly alluded to the principle in limited circumstances. Haldane famously joked that he would willingly die for 2 brothers or 8 cousins, and R.A. Fisher mentioned a similar principle even more briefly in 1930. However, it was not until 1964 that W.D. Hamilton generalized the concept and developed it mathematically, resulting in Hamilton's rule, that it began to be widely accepted. The mathematical treatment was made more elegant in 1970 due to advances made by George R. Price. The term, kin selection, was first used by John Maynard Smith in 1964. According to Hamilton's rule, kin selection causes genes to increase in frequency when the genetic relatedness of a recipient to an actor multiplied by the benefit to the recipient is greater than the reproductive cost to the actor. 2-3. Hamilton proposed 2 mechanisms for kin selection. First, kin recognition allows individuals to be able to identify their relatives. Second, in viscous populations, populations in which the movement of organisms from their place of birth is relatively slow, local interactions tend to be among relatives by default. The viscous population mechanism makes kin selection and social cooperation possible in the absence of kin recognition. In this case, nurture kinship, the interaction between related individuals, simply as a result of living in each other's proximity, is sufficient for kin selection, given reasonable assumptions about population dispersal rates. Kin selection is not the same thing as group selection, where natural selection is believed to act on the group as a whole. In humans, altruism is both more likely and on a larger scale with kin than with unrelated individuals. For example, humans give presents according to how closely related they are to the recipient. In other species, vervet monkeys use allomothering, where related females such as older sisters or grandmothers often care for young, according to their relatedness. The social shrimp Synalpheus regalis protects juveniles within highly related colonies. Historical overview. Charles Darwin wrote that selection could be applied to the family as well as to the individual. 4. Charles Darwin was the first to discuss the concept of kin selection without using that term. In On the Origin of Species, he wrote about the conundrum represented by altruistic sterile social insects that, 4. This difficulty, though appearing insuperable, is lessened, or, as I believe, disappears, when it is remembered that selection may be applied to the family, as well as to the individual, and may thus gain the desired end. Breeders of cattle wish the flesh and fat to be well marbled together. An animal thus characterized has been slaughtered, but the breeder has gone with confidence to the same stock and has succeeded. Darwin. In this passage, the family, and stock, stand for a kin group. These passages and others by Darwin about kin selection are highlighted in D.J. Futuma's textbook of reference Evolutionary Biology, 5, and in E.O. Wilson's Sociobiology. 6. Kin selection was briefly referred to by R.A. Fisher in 1937, and J.B.S. Haldane in 1932, 8, and 1955. 9. J.B.S. Haldane grasped the basic quantities in kin selection, famously writing, "I would lay down my life for 2 brothers or 8 cousins." 10. Haldane's remark alluded to the fact that if an individual loses its life to save 2 siblings, 4 nephews, or 8 cousins, it is a fair deal, in evolutionary terms, as siblings are on average 50% identical by descent, nephews 25%, and cousins 12.5% in a diploid population that is randomly mating and previously outbred. But Haldane also joked. 11. 12. In 1950. But Haldane also joked that he would truly die only to save more than a single identical twin of his or more than 2 full siblings. 11. 12. In 1955 he clarified. 13. Let us suppose that you carry a rare gene that affects your behavior so that you jump into a flooded river and save a child, but you have 1 chance in 10 of being drowned, while I do not possess the gene, and stand on the bank and watch the child drown. If the child's your own child or your brother or sister, there is an even chance that this child will also have this gene, so 5 genes will be saved in children for 1 lost in an adult. If you save a grandchild or a nephew, the advantage is only 2.5 to 1. If you only save a first cousin, the effect is very slight. If you try to save your first cousin once removed, the population is more likely to lose this valuable gene than to gain it. It is clear that genes making for conduct of this kind would only have a chance of spreading in rather small populations when most of the children were fairly near relatives of the man who risked his life. W. D. Hamilton, in 1963-14, and especially in 1964-3, generalized the concept and developed it mathematically, showing that it holds for genes even when they are not rare, deriving Hamilton's rule and defining a new quantity known as an individual's inclusive fitness. He is widely credited as the founder of the field of social evolution. A more elegant mathematical treatment was made possible by George Price in 1970. 15. The evolutionary biologist John Maynard Smith used the term, kin selection, in 1964. John Maynard Smith may have coined the actual term, kin selection, in 1964. 16. These processes I will call kin selection and group selection respectively. Kin selection has been discussed by Haldane and by Hamilton. By kin selection I mean the evolution of characteristics which favor the survival of close relatives of the affected individual, by processes which do not require any discontinuities in the population breeding structure. Kin selection causes changes in gene frequency across generations. Kin selection causes changes in gene frequency across generations. Kin selection causes changes in gene frequency across generations, driven by interactions between related individuals. This dynamic forms the conceptual basis of the theory of sociobiology. Some cases of evolution by natural selection can only be understood by considering how biological relatives influence each other's fitness. Under natural selection, a gene encoding a trait that enhances the fitness of each individual carrying it should increase in frequency within the population, and conversely, a gene that lowers the individual fitness of its carriers should be eliminated. However, a hypothetical gene that prompts behavior which enhances the fitness of relatives but lowers that of the individual displaying the behavior, may nonetheless increase in frequency, because relatives often carry the same gene. According to this principle, the enhanced fitness of relatives can at times more than compensate for the fitness loss incurred by the individuals displaying the behavior, making kin selection possible. This is a special case of a more general model, inclusive fitness. 17. This analysis has been challenged. 18. Wilson writing that, the foundations of the general theory of inclusive fitness based on the theory of kin selection have crumbled. 19. And that he now relies instead on the theory of eusociality and gene culture coevolution for the underlying mechanics of sociobiology. Inclusive fitness theory is still generally accepted however, as demonstrated by the publication of a rebuttal to Wilson's claims in Nature from over 100 researchers. 20. Kin selection is contrasted with group selection, according to which a genetic trait can become prevalent within a group because it benefits the group as a whole, regardless of any benefit to individual organisms. All known forms of group selection conform to the principle that an individual behavior can be evolutionarily successful only if the genes responsible for this behavior conform to Hamilton's rule, and hence, on balance and in the aggregate, benefit from the behavior. 21-22. Hamilton's rule. Formally, genes should increase in frequency when, where R equals the genetic relatedness of the recipient to the actor, often defined as the probability that a gene picked randomly from each at the same locus is identical by descent. B equals the additional reproductive benefit gained by the recipient of the altruistic act. C equals the reproductive cost to the individual performing the act. This inequality is known as Hamilton's rule after W. D. Hamilton, who in 1964 published the first formal quantitative treatment of kin selection. 2-3. The relatedness parameter R in Hamilton's rule was introduced in 1922 by Sewall Wright as a coefficient of relationship that gives the probability that at a random locus, the alleles there will be identical by descent. 23. Modern formulations of the rule use Alan Graffin's definition of relatedness based on the theory of linear regression. 24. A 2014 review of many lines of evidence for Hamilton's rule found that its predictions were confirmed in a wide variety of social behaviors across a broad phylogenetic range of birds, mammals and insects, in each case comparing social and non-social taxa. 25. Among the experimental findings, a 2010 study used a wild population of red squirrels in Yukon, Canada. Surrogate mothers adopted related orphan squirrel pups but not unrelated orphans. The cost of adoption was calculated by measuring a decrease in the survival probability of the entire litter after increasing the litter by one pup, while benefit was measured as the increased chance of survival of the orphan. The degree of relatedness of the orphan and surrogate mother for adoption to occur depended on the number of pups the surrogate mother already had in her nest, as this affected the cost of adoption. Females always adopted orphans when RB was greater than C, but never adopted when RB was less than C, supporting Hamilton's rule. 26. Note 1. Mechanisms. Altruism occurs where the instigating individual suffers a fitness loss while the receiving individual experiences a fitness gain. Kin selection is contrasted with group selection, according to which a genetic trait can become prevalent within a group because it benefits the group as a whole, regardless of any benefit to individual organisms. All known forms of group selection conform to the principle that an individual behavior can be evolutionarily successful only if the genes responsible for this behavior conform to Hamilton's rule, and hence, on balance and in the aggregate, benefit from the behavior. 21-22. Hamilton's rule. Formally, genes should increase in frequency when, where R equals the genetic relatedness of the recipient to the actor, often defined as the probability that a gene picked randomly from each at the same locus is identical by descent. B equals the additional reproductive benefit gained by the recipient of the altruistic act. C equals the reproductive cost to the individual performing the act. This inequality is known as Hamilton's rule after W. D. Hamilton, who in 1964 published the first formal quantitative treatment of kin selection. 2-3. The relatedness parameter R in Hamilton's rule was introduced in 1922 by Sewall Wright as a coefficient of relationship that gives the probability that at a random locus, the alleles there will be identical by descent. 23. Modern formulations of the rule use Alan Graffin's definition of relatedness based on the theory of linear regression. 24. A 2014 review of many lines of evidence for Hamilton's rule found that its predictions were confirmed in a wide variety of social behaviors across a broad phylogenetic range of birds, mammals and insects, in each case comparing social and non-social taxa. 25. Among the experimental findings, a 2010 study used a wild population of red squirrels in Yukon, Canada. Surrogate mothers adopted related orphan squirrel pups but not unrelated orphans. The cost of adoption was calculated by measuring a decrease in the survival probability of the entire litter after increasing the litter by one pup, while benefit was measured as the increased chance of survival of the orphan. The degree of relatedness of the orphan and surrogate mother for adoption to occur depended on the number of pups the surrogate mother already had in her nest, as this affected the cost of adoption. Females always adopted orphans when RB was greater than C, but never adopted when RB was less than C, supporting Hamilton's rule. 26. Note 1. Mechanisms. Altruism occurs where the instigating individual suffers a fitness loss while the receiving individual experiences a fitness gain. The sacrifice of one individual to help another as an example. 27. Hamilton outlined two ways in which kin selection altruism could be favored. The selective advantage which makes behavior conditional in the right sense on the discrimination of factors which correlate with the relationship of the individual concerned is therefore obvious. It may be, for instance, that in respect of a certain social action performed towards neighbors indiscriminately, an individual is only just breaking even in terms of inclusive fitness. If he could learn to recognize those of his neighbors who really were close relatives and could devote his beneficial actions to them alone, an advantage to inclusive fitness would at once appear. Thus a mutation causing such discriminatory behavior itself benefits inclusive fitness and would be selected. In fact, the individual may not need to perform any discrimination so sophisticated as we suggest here, a difference in the generosity of his behavior according to whether the situations evoking it were encountered near to, or far from, his own home might occasion an advantage of a similar kind. 2. Kin recognition and the green beard effect. Kin recognition theory predicts a selective advantage for the bearers of a trait like the fictitious green beard behave altruistically towards others with the same trait. First, if individuals have the capacity to recognize kin and to discriminate positively, on the basis of kinship, then the average relatedness of the recipients of altruism could be high enough for kin selection. Because of the facultative nature of this mechanism, kin recognition and discrimination were expected to be unimportant except among higher forms of life. However, as molecular recognition mechanisms have been shown to operate in organisms such as slime molds, 28 kin recognition has much wider importance than previously recognized. Kin recognition may be selected for inbreeding avoidance, and little evidence indicates that innate kin recognition plays a role in mediating altruism. A thought experiment on the kin recognition discrimination distinction is the hypothetical green beard, where a gene for social behavior is imagined also to cause a distinctive phenotype that can be recognized by other carriers of the gene. Due to conflicting genetic similarity in the rest of the genome, there should be selection pressure for green beard altruistic sacrifices to be suppressed, making common ancestry the most likely form of inclusive fitness. 229. This suppression is overcome if new phenotypes other beard colors are formed through mutation or introduced into the population from time to time. This proposed mechanism goes by the name of beard chromodynamics. Viscous populations. Secondly, indiscriminate altruism may be favored in viscous populations, those with low rates or short ranges of dispersal. Here, social partners are typically related, and so altruism can be selective advantageous without the need for kin recognition and kin discrimination faculties. Spatial proximity, together with limited dispersal, ensures that social interactions are more often with related individuals. This suggests a rather general explanation for altruism. Directional selection always favors those with higher rates of fecundity within a certain population. Social individuals can often enhance the survival of their own kin by participating in and following the rules of their own group. 2. Hamilton later modified his thinking to suggest that an innate ability to recognize actual genetic relatedness was unlikely to be the dominant mediating mechanism for kin altruism. 31. But once again, we do not expect anything describable as an innate kin recognition adaptation, used for social behavior other than mating, for the reasons already given in the hypothetical case of the trees. Hamilton's later clarifications often go unnoticed. Stuart West and colleagues have countered the long-standing assumption that kin selection requires innate powers of kin recognition. 32. Another doubtful assumption is that social cooperation must be based on limited dispersal and shared developmental context. Such ideas have obscured the progress made in applying kin selection to species including humans, on the basis of cue-based mediation of social bonding and social behaviors. 33. 34. Special cases. Eusociality. Answer. Eusocial insects, the queen, large, center, is reproductive, while the workers, small, and soldiers, medium size, with large jaws, are generally not. Eusociality, true sociality, occurs in social systems with three characteristics: an overlap in generations between parents and their offspring, cooperative brood care, and specialized castes of non-reproductive individuals. 35. The social insects provide good examples of organisms with what appear to be kin-selected traits. The workers of some species are sterile, a trait that would not occur if individual selection was the only process at work. The relatedness coefficient R is abnormally high between the worker sisters in a colony of Hymenoptera due to haplodiploidy. Hamilton's rule is presumed to be satisfied because the benefits in fitness for the workers are believed to exceed the costs in terms of lost reproductive opportunity, though this has never been demonstrated empirically. Competing hypotheses have been offered to explain the evolution of social behavior in such organisms. 18. The eusocial shrimp Synalpheus regalis protects juveniles in the colony. By defending the young, the large defender shrimp can increase its inclusive fitness. Allozyme data demonstrated high relatedness within colonies, averaging 0.50. This means that colonies represent close kin groups, supporting the hypothesis of kin selection. 36. Allomothering. Vervet monkeys behave in ways that imply kin selection. Vervet monkeys utilize allomothering, parenting by group members other than the actual mother or father, where the allomother is typically an older female sibling or a grandmother. Individuals act aggressively toward other individuals that were aggressive toward their relatives. The behavior implies kin selection between siblings, between mothers and offspring, and between grandparents and grandchildren. 37. 38. In humans. Whether or not Hamilton's rule always applies, relatedness is often important. Vervet monkeys utilize allomothering, parenting by group members other than the actual mother or father, where the allomother is typically an older female sibling or a grandmother. Individuals act aggressively toward other individuals that were aggressive toward their relatives. The behavior implies kin selection between siblings, between mothers and offspring, and between grandparents and grandchildren. 37. 38. In humans. Whether or not Hamilton's rule always applies, relatedness is often important for human altruism, in that humans are inclined to behave more altruistically toward kin than toward unrelated individuals. 39. Many people choose to live near relatives, exchange sizable gifts with relatives, and favor relatives in wills in proportion to their relatedness. 39. Experimental studies, interviews, and surveys. Interviews of several hundred women in Los Angeles showed that while non-kin friends were willing to help one another, their assistance was far more likely to be reciprocal. The largest amounts of non-reciprocal help, however, were reportedly provided by kin. Additionally, more closely related kin were considered more likely sources of assistance than distant kin. 40. Similarly, several surveys of American college students found that individuals were more likely to incur the cost of assisting kin when a high probability that relatedness and benefit would be greater than cost existed. Participants' feelings of helpfulness were stronger toward family members than non-kin. Additionally, participants were found to be most willing to help those individuals most closely related to them. Interpersonal relationships between kin in general were more supportive and less Machiavellian than those between non-kin. 41. In one experiment, the longer participants, from both the UK and the South African Zulus, held a painful skiing position, the more money or food was presented to a given relative. Participants repeated the experiment for individuals of different relatedness, parents and siblings at R equals 0.5, grandparents, nieces, and nephews at R equals 0.25, etc. The results showed that participants held the position for longer intervals the greater the degree of relatedness between themselves and those receiving the reward. 42. Observational studies. A study of food sharing practices on the West Carolina islets of Ifaluk determined that food sharing was more common among people from the same islet, possibly because the degree of relatedness between inhabitants of the same islet would be higher than relatedness between inhabitants of different islets. When food was shared between islets, the distance the sharer was required to travel correlated with the relatedness of the recipient. A greater distance meant that the recipient needed to be a closer relative. The relatedness of the individual and the potential inclusive fitness benefit needed to outweigh the energy cost of transporting the food over distance. 43. Humans may use the inheritance of material goods and wealth to maximize their inclusive fitness. By providing close kin with inherited wealth, an individual may improve his or her kin's reproductive opportunities and thus increase his or her own inclusive fitness even after death. A study of 1,000 wills found that the beneficiaries who received the most inheritance were generally those most closely related to the will's writer. Distant kin received proportionally less inheritance, with the least amount of inheritance going to non-kin. 44. A study of childcare practices among Canadian women found that respondents with children provide childcare reciprocally with non-kin. The cost of caring for non-kin was balanced by the benefit a woman received, having her own offspring cared for in return. However, respondents without children were significantly more likely to offer childcare to kin. For individuals without their own offspring, the inclusive fitness benefits of providing care to closely related children might outweigh the time and energy costs of childcare. 45. Family investment in offspring among Black South African households also appears consistent with an inclusive fitness model. A higher degree of relatedness between children and their caregivers was correlated with a higher degree of investment in the children, with more food, health care, and clothing. Relatedness was also associated with the regularity of a child's visits to local medical practitioners and with the highest grade the child had completed in school, and negatively associated with children being behind in school for their age. 46. Observation of the Dolgan hunter-gatherers of northern Russia suggested that there are larger and more frequent asymmetrical transfers of food to kin. Kin are more likely to be welcome to non-reciprocal meals, while non-kin are discouraged from attending. Finally, when reciprocal food sharing occurs between families, these families are often closely related, and the primary beneficiaries are the offspring. 47. Violence in families is more likely when step-parents are present, and that genetic relationship is associated with a softening of conflict, and people's evident valuations of themselves and of others are systematically related to the parties' reproductive values. 48. Numerous studies suggest how inclusive fitness may work amongst different peoples, such as the Yekwana of southern Venezuela, the Gypsies of Hungary, and the doomed Donner Party of the United States. 49, 50, 51, 52. Human social patterns. Families are important in human behavior, but kin selection may be based on closeness and other cues. Evolutionary psychologists, following early human sociobiologists' interpretation, 53, of kin selection theory initially attempted to explain human altruistic behavior through kin selection by stating that behaviors that help a genetic relative are favored by natural selection. However, many evolutionary psychologists recognize that this common shorthand formulation is inaccurate. 54. Many misunderstandings persist. In many cases, they result from conflating coefficient of relatedness and proportion of shared genes, which is a short step from the intuitively appealing, but incorrect, interpretation that animals tend to be altruistic toward those with whom they share a lot of genes. These misunderstandings don't just crop up occasionally, they are repeated in many writings, including undergraduate psychology textbooks, most of them in the field of social psychology, within sections describing evolutionary approaches to altruism. As with the earlier sociobiological forays into the cross-cultural data, typical approaches are not able to find explanatory fit with the findings of ethnographers insofar that human kinship patterns are not necessarily built upon blood ties. However, as Hamilton's later refinements of his theory make clear, it does not simply predict that genetically related individuals will inevitably recognize and engage in positive social behaviors with genetic relatives. Rather, indirect context-based mechanisms may have evolved, which in historical environments have met the inclusive fitness criterion. Consideration of the demographics of the typical evolutionary environment of any species is crucial to understanding the evolution of social behaviors. As Hamilton himself put it, altruistic or selfish acts are only possible when a suitable social object is available. In this sense, behaviors are conditional from the start. 31. Under this perspective, and noting the necessity of a reliable context of interaction being available, the data on how altruism is mediated in social mammals is readily made sense of. In social mammals, primates and humans, altruistic acts that meet the kin selection criterion are typically mediated by circumstantial cues such as shared developmental environment, familiarity and social bonding. 55. That is, it is the context that mediates the development of the bonding process and the expression of the altruistic behaviors, not genetic relatedness as such. This interpretation is compatible with the cross-cultural ethnographic data and has been called nurture kinship. 34. In plants. Observations. Though originally thought unique to the animal kingdom, evidence of kin selection has been identified in the plant kingdom. 56. Competition for resources between developing zygotes in plant ovaries increases when seeds have been pollinated with male gametes from different plants. 57. How developing zygotes differentiate between full siblings and half-siblings in the ovary is undetermined, but genetic interactions are thought to play a role. 57. Nonetheless, competition between zygotes in the ovary is detrimental to the reproductive success of the female plant, and fewer zygotes mature into seeds. 57. As such, the reproductive traits and behaviors of plants suggests the evolution of behaviors and characteristics that increase the genetic relatedness of fertilized eggs in the plant ovary, thereby fostering kin selection and cooperation among the seeds as they develop. These traits differ among plant species. Some species have evolved to have fewer ovules per ovary, commonly one ovule per ovary, thereby decreasing the chance of developing multiple, differently fathered seeds within the same ovary. 57. Multi-ovulated plants have developed mechanisms that increase the chances of all ovules within the ovary being fathered by the same parent. Such mechanisms include dispersal of pollen and aggregated packets and closure of the stigmatic lobes after pollen is introduced. 57. The aggregated pollen packet releases pollen gametes in the ovary, thereby increasing likelihood that all ovules are fertilized by pollen from the same parent. 57. Likewise, the closure of the ovary pore prevents entry of new pollen. 57. Other multi-ovulated plants have evolved mechanisms that mimic the evolutionary adaptation of single-ovulated ovaries. The ovules are fertilized by pollen from different individuals, but the mother ovary then selectively aborts fertilized ovules, either at the zygotic or embryonic stage. 57. Morning glory plants grow smaller roots when next to kin than to non-kin plants. After seeds are dispersed, kin recognition and cooperation affects root formation in developing plants. 58. Studies have found that the total root mass developed by Ipomoea hederaceae, morning glory shrubs grown next to kin is significantly smaller than those grown next to non-kin. 58. 59. Shrubs grown next to kin thus allocate less energy and resources to growing the larger root systems needed for competitive growth. When seedlings were grown in individual pots placed next to kin or non-kin relatives, no difference in root growth was observed. 59. This indicates that kin recognition occurs via signals received by the roots. 59. Further, groups of hederaceae plants are more varied in height when grown with kin than when grown with non-kin. 58. The evolutionary benefit provided by this was further investigated by researchers at the Université de Montpellier. They found that the alternating heights seen in kin-grouped crops allowed for optimal light availability to all plants in the group. Shorter plants next to taller plants had access to more light than those surrounded by plants of similar height. 60. The above examples illustrate the effect of kin selection in the equitable allocation of light, nutrients, and water. The evolutionary emergence of single-ovulated ovaries in plants has eliminated the need for a developing seed to compete for nutrients, thus increasing its chance of survival and germination. 57. Likewise, the fathering of all ovules in multi-ovulated ovaries by one father decreases the likelihood of competition between developing seeds, thereby also increasing the seeds' chances of survival and germination. 57. The decreased root growth in plants grown with kin increases the amount of energy available for reproduction. Plants grown with kin produced more seeds than those grown with non-kin. 58. 59. Similarly, the increase in light made available by alternating heights in groups of related plants is associated with higher fecundity. 58. 60. Kin selection has also been observed in plant responses to herbivora. In an experiment done by Richard Carbon et al., leaves of potted Artemisia tridentata, sagebrushes, were clipped with scissors to simulate herbivora. The gaseous volatiles emitted by the clipped leaves were captured in a plastic bag. When these volatiles were transferred to leaves of a closely related sagebrush, the recipient experienced lower levels of herbivora than those that had been exposed to volatiles released by non-kin plants. 56. Sagebrushes do not uniformly emit the same volatiles in response to herbivora. The chemical ratios and composition of emitted volatiles vary from one sagebrush to another. 56. 61. Closely related sagebrushes emit similar volatiles, and the similarities decrease as relatedness decreases. 56. This suggests that the composition of volatile gases plays a role in kin selection among plants. Volatiles from a distantly related plant are less likely to induce a protective response against herbivora in a neighboring plant than volatiles from a closely related plant. 56. This fosters kin selection, as the volatiles emitted by a plant will activate the herbivorous defense response in related plants only, thus increasing their chance of survival and reproduction. 56. Kin selection may play a role in plant-pollinator interactions, especially because pollinator attraction is influenced not only by floral displays, but by the spatial arrangement of plants in a group, which is referred to as a magnet effect. 62. For example, in an experiment performed on Morichindia moricindioides, Torreses et al. Demonstrated that focal plants in the presence of kin show increased advertising effort, defined as total petal mass of plants in a group divided by the plant biomass compared to those in the presence of non-kin, and that this effect is greater in larger groups. 62. M. moricindioides is a good model organism for the study of plant-pollinator interactions because it really isn't pollinators for reproduction, as it is self-incompatible. 62. The study design for this experiment included planting establishing pots of M. moricindioides with 0, 3 or 6 neighbors either unrelated or half-sib progeny of the same mother, and advertising effort was calculated after 26 days of flowering. 62. The exact mechanism of kin recognition in M. moricindioides is unknown, but possible mechanisms include above-ground communication with volatile compounds, 63, or below-ground communication with root exudates. 64. Mechanisms in plants. The ability to differentiate between kin and non-kin is not necessary for kin selection in many animals. 65. However, because plants do not reliably germinate in close proximity to kin, it is thought that, within the plant kingdom, kin recognition is especially important for kin selection there, but the mechanism remains unknown. 65. 66. One proposed mechanism for kin recognition involves communication through roots, with secretion and reception of root exudates. 65, 67, 68, 69. This would require exudates to be actively secreted by roots of one plant, and detected by roots of neighboring plants. 67, 68. The root exudate allantoin produced by rice plants, Oryza sativa, has been documented to be in greater production when growing next to cultivars that are largely unrelated. 69, 70. High production levels of allantoin correlated to upregulation of auxin and auxin transporters, resulting in increased lateral root development and directional growth of their roots towards non-kin, maximizing competition. 69, 70. This is mainly not observed in Oryza sativa when surrounded by kin, invoking altruistic behaviors to promote inclusive fitness. 69. However, the root receptors responsible for recognition of kin exudates, and the pathway induced by receptor activation, remain unknown. 68. The mycorrhiza associated with roots might facilitate reception of exudates, but again the mechanism is unknown. 71. Another possibility is communication through green leaf volatiles. Carbon et al. Studied kin recognition in sagebrushes, Artemisia tridentata. The volatile donating sagebrushes were kept in individual pots, separate from the plants that received the volatiles, finding that plants responded to herbivore damage to a neighbor's leaves. This suggests that root signaling is not necessary to induce a protective response against herbivora in neighboring kin plants. Carbon et al. Suggests that plants may be able to differentiate between kin and non-kin based on the composition of volatiles. Because only the recipient sagebrush's leaves were exposed, 56, the volatiles presumably activated a receptor protein in the plant's leaves. The identity of this receptor, and the signaling pathway triggered by its activation, both remain to be discovered. 72. Objections. The theory of kin selection has been criticized by W. J. Alonso, in 1998, 73, and by Alonso and C. Shuckpaim, in 2002. 74. They argue that the behaviors which kin selection attempts to explain are not altruistic, in pure Darwinian terms because 1. They may directly favor the performer as an individual aiming to maximize its progeny, so the behaviors can be explained as ordinary individual selection. 2. These behaviors benefit the group, so they can be explained as group selection. Or 3. They are byproducts of a developmental system of many individuals, performing different tasks like a colony of bees. Or the cells of multicellular organisms, which are the focus of selection. They also argue that the genes involved in sex ratio conflicts could be treated as parasites of already established social colonies, not as their promoters, and, therefore the sex ratio in colonies would be irrelevant to the transition to eusociality. 73. 74. Those ideas were mostly ignored until they were put forward again in a series of controversial 20 papers by E.O. Wilson, Bert Haldobler, Martin Novak and Karina Tarnita. 75. 76. 77. Novak, Tarnita and Wilson argued that inclusive fitness theory is not a simplification over the standard approach. It is an alternative accounting method, but one that works only in a very limited domain. Whenever inclusive fitness does work, the results are identical to those of the standard approach. Inclusive fitness theory is an unnecessary detour, which does not provide additional insight or information. Novak, Tarnita, and Wilson, 18. They, like Alonso and Shuckpaim, argue for a multi-level selection model instead. 18. This aroused a strong response, including a rebuttal published in Nature from over 100 researchers. 20. Altruism, biology. In biology, altruism refers to behavior by an individual that increases the fitness of another individual while decreasing their own. 1. Altruism in this sense is different from the philosophical concept of altruism, in which an action would only be called altruistic if it was done with the conscious intention of helping another. In the behavioral sense, there is no such requirement. As such, it is not evaluated in moral terms. It is the consequences of an action for reproductive fitness that determine whether the action is considered altruistic, not the intentions, if any, with which the action is performed. 2. Olive baboons grooming. The term altruism was coined by the French philosopher Auguste Comte in French, as altruism, for an antonym of egoism. 3. 4. He derived it from the Italian altrui, which in turn was derived from Latin alteri, meaning other people, or somebody else. 5. Altruistic behaviors appear most obviously in kin relationships, such as in parenting, but may also be evident among wider social groups, such as in social insects. They allow an individual to increase the success of its genes by helping relatives that share those genes. 6. Obligate altruism is the permanent loss of direct fitness with potential for indirect fitness gain. 7. For example, honeybee workers may forage for the colony. Facultative altruism is temporary loss of direct fitness with potential for indirect fitness gain followed by personal reproduction. For example, a Florida scrub jay may help at the nest, then gain parental territory. 8. Overview. In ethology, the study of behavior, and more generally in the study of social evolution, on occasion, some animals do behave in ways that reduce their individual fitness but increase the fitness of other individuals in the population. This is a functional definition of altruism. 9. Research in evolutionary theory has been applied to social behavior, including altruism. Cases of animals helping individuals to whom they are closely related can be explained by kin selection, and are not considered true altruism. Beyond the physical exertions that in some species mothers and in some species fathers undertake to protect their young, extreme examples of sacrifice may occur. One example is matrophagy, the consumption of the mother by her offspring, in the spider Stegotyphus. Another example is a male spider allowing a female fertilized by him to eat him. Hamilton's rule describes the benefit of such altruism in terms of rights coefficient of relationship to the beneficiary and the benefit granted to the beneficiary minus the cost to the sacrificer. Should this sum be greater than 0, a fitness gain will result from the sacrifice. When apparent altruism is not between kin, it may be based on reciprocity. A monkey will present its back to another monkey, who will pick out parasites. After a time the roles will be reversed. Such reciprocity will pay off, in evolutionary terms, as long as the costs of helping are less than the benefits of being helped and as long as animals will not gain in the long run by cheating, that is to say, by receiving favors without returning them. This is elaborated on in evolutionary game theory and specifically the prisoner's dilemma as social theory. Implications in evolutionary theory. Cooperative hunting by wolves allows them to tackle much larger and more nutritious prey than any individual wolf could handle. However, such cooperation could, potentially, be exploited by selfish individuals who do not expose themselves to the dangers of the hunt, but nevertheless share in the spoils. The existence of altruism in nature is at first sight puzzling, because altruistic behavior reduces the likelihood that an individual will reproduce. The idea that group selection might explain the evolution of altruism was first broached by Darwin himself in The Descent of Man, and Selection in Relation to Sex, 1871. The concept of group selection has had a checkered and controversial history in evolutionary biology, but the uncritical good of the species tradition came to an abrupt halt in the 1960s, due largely to the work of George C. Williams, 10, and John Maynard Smith, 11, as well as Richard Dawkins. 12, 13, 14, 15. These evolutionary theorists pointed out that natural selection acts on the individual, and that it is the individual's fitness, number of offspring and grand offspring produced compared to the rest of the population, that drives evolution. A group advantage, e.g. hunting in a pack, that is disadvantageous to the individual, who might be harmed during the hunt, when it could avoid injury by hanging back from the pack but still share in the spoils, cannot evolve, because the selfish individual will leave, on average, more offspring than those who join the pack and suffer injuries as a result. If the selfishness is hereditary, this will ultimately result in the population consisting entirely of selfish individuals. However, in the 1960s and 1970s an alternative to the group selection theory emerged. This was the kin selection theory, due originally to W. D. Hamilton. 16. Kin selection is an instance of inclusive fitness, which is based on the notion that an individual shares only half its genes with each offspring, but also with each full sibling, see footnote NB1. From an evolutionary genetic point of view, it is therefore as advantageous to help with the upbringing of full sibs as it is to produce and raise one's own offspring. The two activities are evolutionarily entirely equivalent. Cooperative breeding, i.e. helping one's parents raise sibs, provided they are full sibs, could thus evolve without the need for group-level selection. This quickly gained prominence among biologists interested in the evolution of social behavior. 2. In 1971 Robert Trivers, 19, introduced his reciprocal altruism theory to explain the evolution of helping at the nest of an unrelated breeding pair of birds. He argued that an individual might act as a helper if there was a high probabilistic expectation of being helped by the recipients at some later date. If, however, the recipients did not reciprocate when it was possible to do so, the altruistic interaction with these recipients would be permanently terminated. But if the recipients did not cheat, then the reciprocal altruism would continue indefinitely to both parties' advantage. 20. This model was considered by many, e.g. West Eberhard, 21, and Dawkins, 22, to be evolutionarily unstable because it is prone to invasion by cheats for the same reason that cooperative hunting can be invaded and replaced by cheats. However, Trivers did make reference to the prisoner's dilemma game which, 10 years later, would restore interest in Trivers' reciprocal altruism theory, but under the title of tit for tat. 23. In its original form, the prisoner's dilemma game (PDG) described two awaiting trial prisoners, A and B, each faced with the choice of betraying the other or remaining silent. The game has 4 possible outcomes. A. They both betray each other, and are both sentenced to 2 years in prison. B. A betrays B, which sets a free, and B is sentenced to 4 years in prison. C. B betrays A, with the same result as B, except that it is B who is set free and the other spends 4 years in jail. D. Both remain silent, resulting in a 6-month sentence each. Clearly, D. Cooperation is the best mutual strategy, but from the point of view of the individual, betrayal is unbeatable, resulting in being set free, or getting only a 2-year sentence. Remaining silent results in a 4-year or 6-month sentence. This is exemplified by a further example of a PDG. 2 strangers attend a restaurant together and decide to split the bill. The mutually best ploy would be for both parties to order the cheapest items on the menu, mutual cooperation. But if one member of the party exploits the situation by ordering the most expensive items, then it is best for the other member to do likewise. In fact, if the fellow diner's personality is completely unknown, and the 2 diners are unlikely ever to meet again, it is always in one's own best interest to eat as expensively as possible. Situations in nature that are subject to the same dynamics, rewards and penalties, as the PDG define cooperative behavior. It is never in the individual's fitness interests to cooperate, even though mutual cooperation rewards the 2 contestants together more highly than any other strategy. 24. Cooperation cannot evolve under these circumstances. However, in 1981 Axelrod and Hamilton, 23, noted that if the same contestants in the PDG meet repeatedly, the so-called iterated prisoner's dilemma game, IPD, then tit for tat, foreshadowed by Robert Trivers' reciprocal altruism theory, is a robust strategy which promotes altruism. 23, 24, 25. In tit for tat, both players' opening moves are cooperation. Thereafter each contestant repeats the other player's last move, resulting in a seemingly endless sequence of mutually cooperative moves. However, mistakes severely undermine tit for tat's effectiveness, giving rise to prolonged sequences of betrayal, which can only be rectified by another mistake. Since these initial discoveries, all the other possible IPD game strategies have been identified, 16 possibilities in all, including, for instance, generous tit for tat, which behaves like tit for tat, except that it cooperates with a small probability when the opponent's last move was betray. 26. But all can be outperformed by at least one of the other strategies, should one of the players switch to such a strategy. The result is that none is evolutionarily stable, and any prolonged series of the iterated prisoner's dilemma game, in which alternative strategies arise at random, gives rise to a chaotic sequence of strategy changes that never ends. 24, 27, 28. The handicap principle. A male peacock with its beautiful but clumsy, aerodynamically unsound tail, a handicap, comparable to a racehorse's handicap. The best horses in a handicap race carry the largest weights, so the size of the handicap is a measure of the animal's quality. In the light of the iterated prisoner's dilemma game failing to provide a full answer to the evolution of cooperation or altruism, several alternative explanations have been proposed. There are striking parallels between altruistic acts and exaggerated sexual ornaments displayed by some animals, particularly certain bird species, such as, amongst others, the peacock. Both are costly in fitness terms, and both are generally conspicuous to other members of the population or species. This led Ahmad Zahavi to suggest that both might be fitness signals rendered evolutionarily stable by his handicap principle. 29, 30, 31. If a signal is to remain reliable, and generally resistant to falsification, the signal has to be evolutionarily costly. 32. Thus, if a low-fitness liar were to use the highly costly signal, which seriously eroded its real fitness, it would find it difficult to maintain a semblance of normality. 33. Zahavi borrowed the term, handicap principle, from sports handicapping systems. These systems are aimed at reducing disparities in performance, thereby making the outcome of contests less predictable. In a horse handicap race, provenly faster horses are given heavier weights to carry under their saddles than inherently slower horses. Similarly, in amateur golf, better golfers have fewer strokes subtracted from their raw scores than the less talented players. The handicap therefore correlates with unhandicapped performance, making it possible, if one knows nothing about the horses, to predict which unhandicapped horse would win an open race. It would be the one handicapped with the greatest weight in the saddle. The handicaps in nature are highly visible, and therefore a peahen, for instance, would be able to deduce the health of a potential mate by comparing its handicap, the size of the peacock's tail, with those of the other males. The loss of the male's fitness caused by the handicap is offset by its increased access to females, which is as much a fitness concern as is its health. An altruistic act is, by definition, similarly costly. It would therefore also signal fitness, and is probably as attractive to females as a physical handicap. If this is the case, altruism is evolutionarily stabilized by sexual selection. 30. African pygmy kingfisher, showing details of appearance and coloration that are shared by all African pygmy kingfishers to a high degree of fidelity. 34. There is an alternate strategy for identifying fit mates which does not rely on one gender having exaggerated sexual ornaments or other handicaps, but is generally applicable to most, if not all sexual creatures. It derives from the concept that the change in appearance and functionality caused by a non-silent mutation will generally stand out in a population. This is because that altered appearance and functionality will be unusual, peculiar, and different from the norm within that population. The norm against which these unusual features are judged is made up of fit attributes that have attained their plurality through natural selection, while less adaptive attributes will be in the minority or frankly rare. 35. Since the overwhelming majority of mutant features are maladaptive, and it is impossible to predict evolution's future direction, sexual creatures would be expected to prefer mates with the fewest unusual or minority features. 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. This will have the effect of a sexual population rapidly shedding peripheral phenotypic features and canalizing the entire outward appearance and behavior so that all the members of that population will begin to look remarkably similar in every detail, as illustrated in the accompanying photograph of the African pygmy kingfisher, Ispidina picta. Once a population has become as homogeneous in appearance as is typical of most species, its entire repertoire of behaviors will also be rendered evolutionarily stable, including any altruistic, cooperative and social characteristics. Thus, in the example of the selfish individual who hangs back from the rest of the hunting pack, but who nevertheless joins in the spoils, that individual will be recognized as being different from the norm, and will therefore find it difficult to attract a mate. 38. Its genes will therefore have only a very small probability of being passed on to the next generation, thus evolutionarily stabilizing cooperation and social interactions at whatever level of complexity is the norm in that population. 28. 40. Contrary to the mainstream dogma, a recently published article 41. Using agent-based models demonstrates that several crucial mechanisms, such as kin selection, punishment, multi-level selection, and spatial structure, cannot rescue the evolution of cooperation. The new findings revive a long-standing puzzle in the evolution theory. In addition, the work has potential therapeutic benefits for numerous incurable diseases. Reciprocity mechanisms. Altruism in animals describes a range of behaviors performed by animals that may be to their own disadvantage but which benefit others. 42. The costs and benefits are measured in terms of reproductive fitness, or expected number of offspring. So by behaving altruistically, an organism reduces the number of offspring it is likely to produce itself, but boosts the likelihood that other organisms are to produce offspring. There are other forms of altruism in nature other than risk-taking behavior, such as reciprocal altruism. This biological notion of altruism is not identical to the everyday human concept. For humans, an action would only be called altruistic if it was done with the conscious intention of helping another. Yet in the biological sense there is no such requirement. Instead, until we can communicate directly with other species, an accurate theory to describe altruistic acts between species is biological market theory. Humans and other animals exchange benefits in several ways, known technically as reciprocity mechanism. No matter what the mechanism, the common thread is that benefits find their way back to the original giver. Symmetry-based. Also known as the buddy system, mutual affection between two parties prompts similar behavior in both directions without need to track of daily give and take, so long as the overall relationship remains satisfactory. This is one of the most common mechanisms of reciprocity in nature. This kind is present in humans, primates, and many other mammals. Attitudinal. Also known as, if you're nice, I'll be nice too. This mechanism of reciprocity is similar to the heuristic of the golden rule, treat others how you would like to be treated. Parties mirror one another's attitudes, exchanging favors on the spot. Instant attitudinal reciprocity occurs among monkeys, and people often rely on it with strangers and acquaintances. Calculated. Also known as, what have you done for me lately? Individuals keep track of the benefits they exchange with particular partners, which helps them decide to whom to return favors. This mechanism is typical of chimpanzees and very common among human relationships. 43. Yet some opposing experimental research suggests that calculated or contingent reciprocity does not spontaneously arise in laboratory experimental settings, despite patterns of behavior. Biological market theory. Biological market theory is an extension of the idea of reciprocal altruism, as a mechanism to explain altruistic acts between unrelated individuals in a more flexible system of exchanging commodities. The term biological market was first used by Ronald Noe